The French Insurgency and Napoleon. The year 1789 marks a flag occasion in European and world history. The topple of a government through a prevalent insurgency. Like most authentic markers, the utilize of this one specific year, 1789, is a shorthand that veils a much more complex reality expanding over numerous more long time. In spite of the fact that 1789 stamped the raging of the Bastille and the affirmation of the rights of man, the ruler, Louis XVI, R. 1774 to 1793, was not really ousted until 1792, and he was executed in 1793. And much of the effect of the French transformation was felt somewhere else in Europe, as it were after Napoleon Bonaparte seized control in 1799. The transformation was not completely concluded until the vanquish of Napoleon and the reclamation of the government in 1815. Nor was it genuinely vanquished indeed at that point. That these occasions happened in France had uncommon importance for the rest of Europe. As famous in the past chapter, France was in numerous ways the most vital nation on the landmass at the time of the transformation. Louis XIV, R. 1643 to 1715, the Sun Lord, had built up a standard for a thorough, capable, and rich government, and his lavish royal residence at Versailles was appreciated all over Europe. With a few 28 million occupants, France was the most crowded nation on the landmass. It was a driving center of expressions and sciences, and the central point of the mental age of the edification. French was the most broadly utilized worldwide dialect, the dialect both of strategy and of most of the regal courts of Europe. As with all insurgencies, the causes of the French insurgency of 1789 included both long-term and basic components, as well as more prompt occasions. The previous include the financial changes of the 1824 Chapter 2 century, the thoughts of the Illumination, and shortcomings in the government. The short-term variables were fundamentally financial, government obligation, a money-related emergency, and a terrible collect year. The money-related emergency driven the Lord convoked a assembly of the domains common in 1789, and from their occasions cascaded out of control. Amid most of the 18th century, France experienced both financial solidness and development. Agrarian efficiency and mechanical generation expanded consistently in the center portion of the century, and the proficiency rate of the populace developed from 21% at the starting of the century to 37% at the conclusion. Be that as it may, as we saw in the past chapter, it was moreover a time of financial and mental mature. Industry and commerce were changing the financial scene and cultivating the development of cities. An unused center course, the bourgeoisie, who were unsettling for more impact both in economy and in the political domain. Illumination scholars were broaching thoughts of devout and social opportunity, age and educate, and legitimate correspondence, and they were more by and large squeezing for alter and advance. The 18th century saw a quick development in the distribution of books, periodicals, and flyers, which permitted wide dispersal of these unused thoughts, and, with that, the early stages of open supposition. By the conclusion of the century, be that as it may, France was enduring genuine issues. Unwasteful framework of tax assessment made it troublesome for the government to raise the cash it required. Moreover, both the church and the respectability, which together possessed much of the arrive in the nation, were for all intents and purposes absolved from charges. The money-related issues of the administration were made more regrettable by the monetary and fabric help given by France to the American colonies amid their war of freedom against Britain. For France, this was a key choice, or maybe than an ethical or ideological one, as it was expecting to debilitate the country's chief match, Britain, and to retaliate for the misfortune of French colonies in America and India amid the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War in North America. The combination of mounting obligations and incapable assessed collection implied that, by 1787, installments on the obligation ingested around half of all the charges that were collected. The financial droop affected the rest of the French populace as well. The financial development of the 18th century and the moment of silver from the unused world had fueled swelling in France, a wonder that was both unused and disturbing for numerous individuals. Between 1726 and 1789, the fetch of living expanded by 62%, though compensation rose by, as it were, 25%. In the 1780s, expanded competition from British material producers driven to gigantic unemployment in the material towns of northern France. At that point, 1788 saw the most exceedingly bad grain gather in France since 1709, causing increments in grain and nourishment costs, nourishment deficiencies, and indeed starvation. All this incited rising discontent in both the cities and the wide open. The French transformation and Napoleon 25 one more issue was the shortcoming of the government. Louis XIV had been a solid and incredible pioneer, but his successors were not one or the other, and Louis XVI was both frail and incapable. He was not able to control his priests, and ecclesiastical infighting made it troublesome to bargain with the budgetary emergency of the 1780s. Besides, Louis had gotten to be a virtual detainee of Versailles, seldom taking off the Paris locale, and he was subsequently progressively separated from his subjects and the assorted districts of his kingdom. 1789. The insurgency starts in confront of the monetary emergency and the refusal of the advantaged classes to endorse modern charges. Louis XVI chosen to convoke the bequest common to address government changes and the charge framework. In gathering speaking to the three estates, the clergy, respectability, and the third estate, the domains common had not met since 1614. The 1,200 delegates of bequest common met at Versailles starting in May 1789. Bringing with them the cahiers de doléances, or a list of grievances, that voters had drawn up in constituent gatherings that chosen the delegates. The cahiers by and large called for, or maybe direct changes of the legal, charge, and seigneurial frameworks, and were not on entirety progressive. All things considered, the exceptionally prepared drawing of the records had politicized the populace and centered national consideration on the get-together in Versailles. Indeed, sometime recently the delegates collected. A wrangle about emerged on how voting was to be conducted at the domains common. Customarily, each of the three bequests sent the same number of delegates to the bequest common, and the voting there was by range, not by head, meaning that the third bequest, speaking to over 95% of the populace, had, as it were, one vote of the three. But in a few of the common congregations assembled the past summer, the third bequest had been given half of all the delegates, and voting was by head. So there was a few point of reference for altar, an empowerful handout entitled, "What is the Third Estate?" A theretofore cloud cleric, Abbé Size, replied the title addressed everything, and recommended a comparable equation for voting. Size's leaflet talked about more than voting methods, in spite of the fact that, and indicated that indeed more radical changes. If the favored arrange were abolished, he composed, the country would be not something less, but something more. In June, the third bequest basically embraced the program set out in Size's leaflet and pronounced itself the national gathering. When they following attempted to amass, they found the entryways of their assembly put bolted, so they moved following the entryway to an indoor tennis court, where they swore the celebrated tennis court vow. Wherever we meet, there is a nation. 26 Chapter 2 they broadcasted and promised not to defer until France was given an used structure. As the delegates in the city of Paris got to be more wild, the rulers started to move troops into the city, with rumors that the administration was expectation on dissolving the national gathering. Equipped volunteer armies started to shape all through the city. On July 14th, a swarm of 80,000 raised the Bastille, the ancient regal jail, in trust of seizing ammo put away there. Illustrious troops opened fire, slaughtering 100 individuals. But the swarm one seized a representative of the fortification, cut off his head, and carried it approximately town on the conclusion of a pike. The drop of the Bastille, like the drop of the Berlin Divider 200 a long time afterward, got to be an imperative image of transformation, and that day, Bastille Day, is still celebrated as a French national occasion, total with firecrackers and parades. The Bastille may have had generally typical significance, but in transformations, images are vital. The helplessness of the government was uncovered, and its specialists rapidly vanished. Word around the drop of the Bastille spread to the areas where laborers taken after Parisians by striking the chateaus of their proprietors. In Eminent, the recently styled National Constituent Gathering formally canceled the leftovers of feudalism and liberated laborers from their installments beneath the seigneurial framework. The get-together at that point turned the assignment of deciding the standards on which a modern political administration would be based. The result, passed by the get-together on Admirable 26, was a statement of the rights of man and the citizen, comparable in effect to the American Statement of Autonomy, and afterward the typical establishment of the French Republic. The statement clearly reflects Illumination standards in the thoughts and dialect of Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Locke. It makes no specifier of the specialist of the ruler and announces in step the common, unavoidable, and sacrosanct rights of man. Men are born and stay free and rise to rights, and these rights incorporate liberty, property, security, and resistance oppression. Lord Louis XVI denied to sign the announcement, and most of the appointees at this point still accepted that his signature was fundamental. Sometime recently the record might ended up official. Once more, the Parisian swarm took activity, feeling that the ruler would be more responsive to the will of the individuals if he were in Paris or maybe than Versailles. A swarm of 6,000 ladies, irritated by the brief supply of bread in city markets, walked the 15 miles to Versailles and escorted the Lord back to Paris. For the following a long time, a kind of stalemate one, with the constituent get-together working on a new structure, debating the powers of the government, and wrestling with the country's preceding budgetary emergency, whereas Louis looked on as a sort of de facto protected ruler, in an exertion to bargain with the country's preceding obligations. The gathering reallocated all properties having a place to the church. They ordered the respectful structure of the clergy, which required open decision of clergy and the French Transformation and Napoleon 27 clerics, and constrained the clergy to sign in vow of devotion to the country. At last, in June 1791, the modern structure was displayed to the open, giving for and chosen administrative get-together and allowing the ruler, as it were, suspensive reject. That is, the control to delay enactment but not to overcome it. Alarmed by these improvements, Louis XVI fled Paris masked as a commoner and endeavored to reach the French border to rally those restricted to the insurgency. Among them were for all intents and purposes all of the European rulers, who saw occasions in France as an inauspicious omen for their claim run the show. The sovereign of Russia, Catherine the Awesome, pronounced that the issues of France were concern of all delegated heads. But Louis was captured and brought back to Paris. The unused structure was put into constraint, and an administrative get-together was chosen. Prussia and Austria before long joined in a war against France. And when their troops started to move into France, charges that Louis was in collaboration with remote rulers incited unused insurrection in Paris. Modern decisions were called, and in September 1792, the recently chosen national tradition rejected the later structure, nullified the government, and pronounced the foundation of the begin with French Republic. Box 2.1 Ladies on the insurgency. Ladies played an imperative portion in the progressive occasions in France, counting the walk on Versailles to bring Louis XVI back to Paris, where he would be more open and responsible to the individuals. But the pioneers of the transformation were generally men, and not all ladies were satisfied with the achievements of progressives. The announcement of the rights of man, for illustration, made no specify of ladies at all, driving French writer Alain de Gouges, 1745 to 1793, to distribute in 1791 a declaration of the rights of women, paralleling the articles of the unique statement, but supplanting man with woman. She tended to her request of the ruler, Marie Antoinette, as a mother and a wife, trusting to win bolster for her cause from this persuasive lady. In Britain, the educator and author Mary Wollstonecraft, 1759 to 1797, invited the transformation and saw in it the plausibility of an aging government that would regard the rights of both men and ladies. But she moreover was baffled with the announcement of the rights of man, and indeed more rankled when the French gathering constrained the right to instruction to men as it were. She distributed a vindication of the rights of ladies, 1792, in which she portrayed marriage as legal prostitution and assaulted instructive limitations that kept ladies in a state of ignorance and submissive dependence. It was to begin with book in Britain pushing women's right to vote and hold open office. 28 Chapter 2 The Radical Republic, and the fear of the drop of the government stamped the triumph of well-known majority-rule government and a return to widespread masculinity suffrage, presented in 1789 but surrendered in 1791. In Paris, charismatic pioneers like Georges Danton and Maximilien Robespierre jockeyed for control and impact. Political clubs like the Radical Jacobins and groups shaped. Gatherings and get-together were gone by swarms of standard society who scoffed, cheered, yelled, and tossed things at political pioneers and speakers. Such swarm support had emotional impact on both the arrangements embraced and changes in administration, of which there were numerous. In Paris and the territories, neighborhood clubs and section assemblies drew huge numbers of sans-culottes, those without favorite pants, into nearly day-by-day political action. In the national get-together, but to begin with a range of trade for the recently chosen delegates was the destiny of the previous ruler. A few contended that he ought to be attempted for conspiracy. Others contended that he ought to be executed promptly without trial, while traditionalists held that he delighted in regal insusceptibility from either trial or arraignment. The delegates at long last chosen on a trial, conducted by the national tradition itself. Louis showed up twice in his claimed defense, but after a month, the appointees voted collectively to convict him of machination with outside powers, and at that point, by a limit-line share, to execute him. In January 1793, he was executed on the guillotine, as was his spouse, Marie Antoinette, 9 months afterward. The guillotine, a mechanical decapitating gadget as of late presented as a effortless, hence more compassionate and productive implies of execution, got to be another image of the transformation. Inside a month of Louis's execution, Britain, Holland, and Spain joined Austria and Prussia in the war against France. The danger that the French progressives postured to the governments of Europe was made more quick and individual by the truth that Marie Antoinette was the sister of the ruler of Austria. In France, the combined dangers of counter-revolution and remote war reinforced the hand of more radical groups inside the national tradition, which set up a committee of open security to guard the picks up of the transformation and kill its adversaries. Driven to begin with by Danton and at that point by Robespierre, the committee authoritatively announced the dread, reacting both to inner foes and the risk of outside intrusion. Those who contradicted the insurgency were presently classified as suspects subject to capture and trial. As Robespierre put it, to great citizens, progressive government owes a full assurance of the state. To the foes of the individuals it owes, as it were, death. One, the guillotine was the normal strategy of execution. By and large, approximately 40,000 individuals died amid the dread. Inside a year, the fear had run its course, but not some time recently expending its possess. Upon being driven to platform, Danton told the ex-French transformation and Napoleon 29 executioner, "Show them my head. It is a locate worth seeing." A few months afterward, Robespierre taken after him to the guillotine. After the passing of Robespierre, the tradition destroyed the progressive fascism, composed, however, another structure, and set up a 5-man registry to hold official control. The catalog would final for a long time, attempting to discover center ground between radical transformation and royalist response. Still at war with the rest of Europe and confronting preceding political mature, the registry progressively came to depend for back on the military as its possessed political authenticity melted away. The chiefs themselves bolstered an upset d'état in late 1799, putting the levers of control in the hands of an energetic, youthful military officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon and Europe Napoleon had been made a common in 1793 at the age of 24. To a long time afterward, he made a title for himself by putting down a royalist rebellion in Paris. The another year, he was given command of the French armed force of Italy, where he scored triumph after triumph against the, as far as anyone knows, predominant strengths of Austria. He returned to France a saint, and indeed after the overthrow of 1799, his ubiquity remained tall.